Raised by Demons, a true and accurate autobiography, well, sorta. Part 1. Who knows why netherworld beings, or goblins some call them, or fiends, or ghouls, who knows why they take a special interest in an individual? Almost all reputable experts, termed catodemonologists, agree the persecuted person poses a predestined threat of some magnitude. There are a minority of catodemonologists that differ, saying the malignant forces are merely expressing themselves the only way they know how. Whatever the case, fair-minded specialists agree, woe unto the hapless victim who is caught in the crossfire between providence and opposition forces, since the luckless pawn has not a clue he is in the middle of such a rivalry, nor would he care to participate. Ignorant of the unseen titanic struggle between unworldly powers, the Job figure has no choice but to believe he is a star-crossed born loser, that the odds are stacked against him, that his lot in life is failure, and he's destined to be set upon by one misfortune after another. His only wish, then, is to escape existence forever. Henry's birth was an unremarkable event, certainly nothing to indicate he derived in the midst of a cosmic struggle of forces, at least visibly. Unseen, on the other hand, his birth was notable, enough to be observed by the earlier mentioned netherworld beings. Because of their malignant interest, a three-legged runt in a litter of wolves would have fared better, as his childhood was beset by a series of accidents, unusual mishaps, and bizarre illnesses. When just a toddler, his mother ran over him in the car. She'd backed out the driveway, swung the car around, and drove forward without noticing her child had tumbled out the passenger door. It was only a stroke of luck. A neighbor woman stopped her before she drove away, although not all the observers at the scene agreed the incident was so fortunate. Nevertheless, the front tires just missed Henry's tiny outstretched fingers he'd never forget. This happened in Tyler, Texas, before the family moved to another country. The oil company Henry's father worked for transferred him along with his family to South America to search the Amazon basin for petroleum prospects. In those days, the residents of Bogota, Colombia, looked upon North Americans as despicable upper-class oppressors who came only to rob another country's wealth. Thus, it was only right to rob them first, if not kill, so that soldiers were stationed on each corner of the block they lived on. The Americans, almost all of whom were associated with the oil business in one way or another, lived next door to each other in one packed-together zone that covered several residential blocks. No one went outside of the sector alone except the landmen, they were called, who went downtown to government buildings to investigate property titles. But even this was considered dangerous. Oil company office buildings were contained within the American sector, which exemplified, in an involuntary fashion, small-town America. All the families celebrated birthdays together, the women shopped together, and the men looked out for trouble, which was soon to arrive in a magnitude they could never guess. Everyone had a guard dog of one breed or other. Henry's family had a pet German shepherd. The dog was schizophrenic, the most pleasant of companions on walks up Montserrat Mountain to the monastery for panoramic views of the city and countryside. But that pleasant disposition hid a savageness that was all teeth and fangs. The dog was so protective that if Henry or his sister anticipated a spanking, they could run into the backyard and be completely safe as long as they stayed there with the dog. Every day, a young South American boy would stop in the alley on his way home from school and throw rocks at the dog. He was warned to stop on several occasions, as were his parents, as the dog could almost clear the top of the fence. But the conversations always ended in insults from the other end of the phone or being hung up on. One day, the maids, as domestics could be hired for pennies, had the dog in the front yard on a leash, and that boy walked by on the other side of the street. The German shepherd snapped the chain with no trouble at all, dashed across the street, bit the boy on the leg, and would have gone for his throat when a maid stopped him with an axe. Later on, the 1948 revolution was named Bogotazo when the violence was limited to the city of Bogota, where Henry and his family lived. What began the rioting was the popular presidential candidate among the masses was assassinated, setting off the random burning, destroying, and butchery similar to 1789 France and 1917 Russia, not to mention 1959 Cuba. Hundreds of thousands would die, but instead of the French guillotine or Gulag slavery or the Cuban firing squads, the mobs killed mainly with the machete. La Violencia, the violence was renamed, as the slaughter spread throughout Colombia, involving a young law student named Fidel Castro, if not the instigator of it all, and continued throughout the 1950s, 1960s, and beyond. Henry's family escaped prior to their hotel burning down and flew back to Houston, Texas. Once settled in a home, an 18-year-old next-door neighbor offered to babysit while the mother shopped for furniture and so forth they had to leave behind in South America. The teenage girl had some out-of-the-mainstream ideas about babysitting, to say the least. She would take Henry to a shed between their houses, which was a cute-looking gardening hut from the outside, but once inside, the place turned into a wicked hideaway of perversion. The girl would take off both her and Henry's clothes in order to perform indecent acts. Her misdeeds would never have been discovered, except Henry kept having the same reoccurring nightmares. When he got older, it didn't take much investigating to discover the transgressions actually occurred. But by then, the family had moved apart and nothing was ever done. As in every case where innocence is lost too early, the impact would distort Henry's views on romance long after childhood. For more on that incident, see the short story, The Missing Ring Affair. At about the same time, the family's large dog, not the German Shepherd in Bogota, shoved Henry down a flight of stairs, resulting in head injuries. Relatives were to speculate if this was what caused the personality change in Henry that so mystified them. Who knows? Soon afterwards, a new torment afflicted Henry in that noises, especially voices, intensified progressively until all but unbearable. The sounds would occur when least expected, a school teacher delivering her lesson, or in nightmares, or listening to the TV, or overhearing a conversation. Rather than volume, the unexplainable din was like hearing an authority figure trying to smother a mounting rage on the verge of losing control. Not until the age of 10 did Henry finally overcome the bizarre phenomenon temporarily. While exploring a construction site, he was unexpectedly consumed by rage, as if he'd been holding in the emotion all his young life. He threw paint helter-skelter, emptying the cans like some kind of modern art maniac gone mad. Although eventually caught for the vandalism and punished, the relief he got from the audible torment and the peace he felt made the odd event worthwhile, but not permanently. At different times from then on in his life, especially when under stress, the tormenting noises would reappear, often driving him to the brink of a nervous breakdown. To be continued. For a continuation of Raised by Demons, plus books, plus free short stories, plus videos, go to thereisageneration.com. All one word, thereisageneration.com.